The weird way Trump actually lowered Obamacare premiums for millions. Have you heard about this?
How did he do that?
I don't know. Have you heard about this?
No. Sounds like a headline from like Fox News or something. I don't know.
Yeah, this is a headline from like a week ago, but we've only just now gotten around to talking about it. It's from Sarah Cliff at Vox.
Yeah.
Okay, so about 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration announced that they were going to cut off these cost-sharing reduction payments, CSR payments, to insurers. These are payments that allow insurers to offer lower premiums to low-income people that have slightly higher medical costs. And so a lot of state insurance regulators were ready for this possibility, and what they did is they told insurers, okay, how much extra is this going to cost you because you're not getting these payments? The insurer said, oh, it's going to cost us X. And so the state said, okay, fine, take that money and add it on to your silver plans. So on the Obamacare exchanges, plans are grouped into three categories: silver, bronze, and gold. And the silver plans are the cost of silver plans on a given state's exchange are the benchmark that the law requires for setting ACA subsidies. And so, in effect, the state sort of goosed the level of subsidies that would be available on their exchanges. And as a result, the subsidies are even greater than they had been.
Man, I don't understand that at all.
But who's paying for those subsidies? Is that the feds?
Yeah, these are the tax credits that individuals get for signing up for health insurance.
So, Tom, it sounds like there's two different subsidy regimes, right?
Right. So by cutting off by cutting off the CSR payments, states increase the cost of their silver plans in a way that caused the IRS to pay out more tax credits to low-income individuals. And so in several jurisdictions, on average, the cost of health insurance went down, even though the cost to insurers went up under the Trump cost-sharing reduction payments policy.
But that's only as a tax refund or reduction, right?
Yeah, but the cost borne by the individuals is now lower.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. The cost that the individuals it's basically like there's two ways to subsidize healthcare for people.
You say that, but like, you know, there's a difference, right? Like it's not as if, I mean, this is like saying, oh, you save 20%, all you have to do is buy this. You know what I mean? Like you're still spending more money than you otherwise would have.
No. So what Sarah Cliff is saying is that the cost of bronze plans in these jurisdictions, net of subsidies, has gone down relative to if these states hadn't responded to Trump cutting off the CSR payments. So it is cheaper. It is cheaper now to get insurance in these jurisdictions than it would have been otherwise.
But it's probably costing the government more, right? Because now more money is going to the insurance companies than otherwise would have if we had just kept these cost-sharing payments.
Right.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. I mean, in those areas where this sort of phenomenon has occurred, then the government is actually losing money, right? Like the government would have spent less money if it had just provided the cost-sharing reduction payments.
I don't know if either. I know, AJ, you follow Marco Arment. Rooch, you're not on Twitter, so you
I've
have
heard of
no
him,
idea
though.
What that is.
No, I've heard of Marco Arment.
No, dude, you don't know what Twitter is. Let's just be very
just
clear.
because I don't. Do you watch Fox News, Tom? Because I don't think you would say you don't know what Fox News is.
Dude, I don't know what Fox News is. I have no idea what Fox News is. It's an aberration, dude. But anyway, Marco Arment had a couple of tweets that I'll link in the show notes about how his 2018 healthcare premiums for him, I guess his child and his wife, were somewhere in the range of $2,079 a month.
Yeah, that sounds right. That's about what my healthcare costs.
Your healthcare costs $2,000 a month, AJ?
Yeah, I only pay like $500 of that though because I have an employer.
That's
You should. So your employer is like required to spell out for you like how much they pay and how much you pay. You should take like a serious look at how much the two of you together pay for health insurance because it's staggering.
Yeah, it is quite a bit. I think. Well, you have kids, so like we don't have kids, so I think ours are. I think I pay $450, and I think my employer pays, I don't know, about as much.
No, that can't. Oh, do you cover Steph?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
So one thing do you think that? So I wonder what his deductible is, and then I also wonder how much this insurance would be if he just went for like a high deductible plan, right? Because he's a guy that probably makes enough money to have like a $10,000 deductible plan or something like that. I don't know anything about his plan, obviously. I'm just sort of curious to know how much lower it would be if the deductible was like quite a bit higher.
I don't know. Elections? A lot of elections this week.
Dude, this was a pretty crazy and amazing week in elections.
Why?
Well, also, there were quite a few of them, first of all. There was the Virginia election, and in Virginia, it was a gubernatorial election, as well as their state House of Delegates. Then there was New Jersey gubernatorial election, then New York mayoral election. Then there was, in Maine, they had a ballot proposition to expand Medicaid, right, AJ? Isn't that what they did?
Yep.
Isn't that what they had a ballot proposition over? Yeah. And then there was a special election in the state Senate district in Washington, which normally you're like, why the hell does that matter? But we can talk about that too.
That's all accurate. Good job.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk about like the things that are least likely to have hit kind of national headlines or things that you may not have seen. So in Maine, voters voted. So Maine has a Republican governor, this guy named Paul LePage, I believe is his name. And he's a little kooky, I think is a fair statement. He's a big Trumpist, I believe. And so he was not willing to expand Medicaid. And the voters said, but we want expanded Medicaid, which is a pretty big deal in a state with a Republican governor.
That's, yeah.
Then the next one I'll go to is a state Senate race in Washington. The reason that one was interesting was it was a Democrat and a Republican, and the Republican, as far as I can see, was a moderate Republican, but the Democrat was kind of a moderate Democrat as well. But now that the Democrat has won, Democrats control. They're calling it the blue wall. Have you guys heard this phrase yet?
So Democrats control every state house and every governorship on the West Coast,
which is 3 states. But still, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people, and they've talked about doing some very interesting things. I think this is like probably one of the more interesting things to happen out of this election is actually this relatively random state Senate race in Washington, because I think we always talk about the states as the laboratories for democracy. And now you're going to have 3 states that can, kind of partner up together on things like climate change policy, on water policy, on like a lot of other things that really matter, especially on environmental issues. But they could do a lot of other things as well. But the environmental issues kind of stand at the forefront of my mind. And the fact that they're going to be able to do that is going to be, it's going to be interesting from an experimentation perspective.
So I didn't follow the Washington thing very closely. I was like way too caught up following Virginia. I think I think the most interesting races are in Virginia. Just like a summary of what happened in Virginia, right? So first of all, there was a wave election in Virginia. The Virginia House of Delegates going into the election was like 66 to 34 GOP to Democratic. The governor and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general, the Democratic candidates for all 3 offices won election. The candidate for governor won by 9 points. And this is crazy. In an election where the top of the ticket won by 9 points, you have the House of Delegates is like closely split. The most likely result is going to be 50-50 even control. And I guess there's even a slight chance that one or the other party will have 51 to 49 seats. Some of the races that are outstanding are down to like 70 votes or 100 votes between the 2 candidates. There are 5 races that aren't called right now as we're recording. And so what we have is I think it's like a difficult situation, right? I think it's fair to say that Virginia is like extremely gerrymandered when you can have results like these. I think it is just further evidence of the serious problem that gerrymandering is in our country. As we talked about in a previous episode, where Wisconsin could be, in Wisconsin where Republicans could win 48% of the vote and end up with a supermajority in the House. Here we have in Virginia that the Democrats can have a wave election, a stunning landslide election, and still not win the House, which is just ridiculous. I think it's sad.
So, let me comment on this for a moment, because I agree that gerrymandering is bad, but this was interesting, right? Because it showed that in a state, it showed sort of the permanence of the gerrymander is maybe not as strong as it was originally thought, right? So when this gerrymandering was done, I believe it was probably done in 2010, 2011, AJ? Probably 2011. Going into this election, everybody thought there was no way that the Democrats could make up the kind of ground that they made up, right? And it was thought that there was no way you could get to even, 50-50 was a pipe dream until, basically yesterday, right? Until 24 hours ago. And so it's interesting to see a situation where the permanence of the gerrymander basically just didn't last.
But it did last.
Well, hold on now. So if it's 50-50, right, then I guess it kind of lasted. But if it's 51-49, think about this massive swing, though, right? An 18-seat swing. Like, how well gerrymandered are these districts if you can have an 18-seat swing?
But see, that's the essence of gerrymandering, though, Rooch. Like, the point of gerrymandering is not to have all of these states where you are blowing the other candidate out of the water. The point of gerrymandering is to create these safes. Instead of having like a 75-25 win, a 55-45 win that gets you more seats and more power in your legislative body. You know what I mean? Remember how we were talking about how when we measure gerrymandering, we're looking at how much vote dilution there is and how much vote packing there is. You pack the other guys into a small number of districts, and you spread your own votes across multiple districts, so you can have, because at the end of the day, what matters is the number of districts that you win, not how badly do you win those districts, right?
No, I totally agree. But do you get what I mean about the permanence of the gerrymander when you can have a 16-seat swing in an election? Like,
well, you got to understand, when you say permanence of the gerrymander, when did this gerrymander first take place, right? This is a 10-year cycle.
Well, 2011, right? It was in 11 they rewrote the map, right? Because in 2010 you have the census. So in 11 they rewrote the map. They had an election in, the House of Delegates is up every 2 years, I believe, right? So in 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, you had that's a big swing, 17-seat swing.
I think you're ignoring Tom's point, right? Most of the really large margins, most of the races where the margins in like 60, 70, 80 points. Some of them are won by Republicans, but most of them are won by Democrats. And then you look, you scroll up and you see that the races where the margin is sort of 5, 6, 7 points. Most of those are won by Republicans, right? The point of a gerrymander is to have a minimum of wasted votes, right? To waste the fewest number of votes possible. And the way you waste votes is by having huge blowout elections. So what you end up with is what you end up with when a state is gerrymandered is that the party that has done the gerrymandering will tend to win elections by a relatively small number of votes. They'll tend to win their districts by 2, 3, 4, 5 votes. And that means that when a wave election occurs, you sort of look at it and you say like, gerrymandering, maybe it's not such a big deal. Look, like this wave election occurred in this jurisdiction or whatever. But that actually, if anything, is more evidence that the jurisdiction was so badly gerrymandered. The second point to make here is that you shouldn't need wave elections to get to 50 seats in the House of Delegates, right? You would expect a party that wins at the top of the ballot by 9 points not to be sitting here 2-3 days later still waiting for votes to be counted to see if they might eke out a majority or not, right? Like that is you might say, oh, like this gerrymander is impermanent because it can be overcome, but the point isn't that like the complaint about a gerrymander is not that a party will never ever regain power, right? The point of the complaint about a gerrymander is that you have made these people's votes less meaningful than the votes of partisans for the other party.
So I think a couple of things. One, I think you're what I would like to see, which I guess I can't find at least on the New York Times website, is to see how many raw votes Democratic candidates for the House of Delegates got compared to how many raw votes Republican candidates for the House of Delegates got.
So that isn't tallied yet. It would be very nice to have that, but it's not tallied yet.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe we can talk about that next episode, because I think that would be useful to see, because it's not necessary that, of course, if the top of the ticket gets, wins by 9 points, that, that's actually the vote at the state delegate level, right? And we know that's the case because the attorney general's race was closer, as was the lieutenant governor's race, right? The lieutenant governor's race was a 5-point race, roughly, or 5.5 point race instead of a 9-point race. And then the attorney general's race was, I believe, a 6.5 point race. So, that's an example. The other thing, AJ, that I think you said, which was that an example of wasted votes is when you claimed that all these Democrats are getting 60% of the vote, right? Or whatever the number may be, or 70% of the vote, whereas the Republicans are winning these really close elections. And so I'm just kind of going through the House of Delegates on the New York Times website. And so I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm counting people where the Republicans got more than 60% of the vote, right? 7, 8, or more than 62, let's say. I'm just kind of an arbitrary number. 9, 10 races, 11 races. Now, if you do that same math on the Democrat side, the number of times where Democrats get above, let's call it, and I just randomly pick 62%, so you can, obviously I think you can fairly quibble with that, 7. So in terms of how many of the elections are blowout, so to speak, and this is, it's actually more Republicans, slightly more Republicans are blowout than Democrat, but it's not, crazy, I guess you could say. Plus, your point was that the Democrats should be crazy blowout, whereas the Republican races should be close, which I think is actually not the case in the situations where the Republicans win. But
isn't that the point, that you're going to have a lot of close races?
No, I think AJ's point is that you should actually have, if you as a Republican controlled legislature are packing and cracking efficiently, then what should be happening is that your Republicans should be eking out victories by 5 or 6 points, whereas your Democrats should be blowing out their Republican opponents, because all of the Democrats are packed into a smaller number of districts.
So, Rooch, I think using that. Hold on, yeah, let me respond to that. Right, I think using this wave election to counteract that idea doesn't work, because in a wave election, those districts where you do have the Republicans eking out those votes will go to the Democrats by a narrow margin, right?
Well, I guess so. You guys don't want to use the wave election for proof of your point, but then you don't want to use the wave election. What do you want? I'm not exactly clear on what you think is a valid election versus not for your thesis.
What I'm saying is that I don't think that using the way, trying to find the effect of the gerrymander in a wave election is going to, I guess, be helpful, because the nature of a wave election is that it's an aberration from the norm, right? If it were the norm, it wouldn't be a wave election.
So that's another thing. I'm not sure that it is that. Given how often these wave elections tend to occur, I don't know how much of an aberration it really is, actually.
Let me ask you guys an ancillary question, which I think is more interesting than this conversation, actually. Do you believe that if a party gets, let's say, 60% of the vote, they should be able to have control of 60% of the seats in whatever legislature or whatever body they're getting those votes in?
So here's my answer to that, which is I don't think it just comes down to party. right? I think people vote on things that are more than party. And I think that, well, I mean, look at the disparity that you often see between the top of the ticket and, attorney general's races, or the top of the ticket. I mean, sometimes you see a situation where
that you're fighting the question, Rooch. You're fighting the question, right?
No, I'm fighting the premise of the question, which is that a party that gets 60% of the vote, where the top of the ticket gets 60% of the vote.
No, that wasn't my question. All right. My question is, let's just use Texas as an example. Let's say you have, a race for all of the seats in the Texas House. Okay.
Sure.
In all of those races for the seats in the Texas House, let's say the Democrats get 60% of the votes in the race, not the governor's race, not the lieutenant governor's race, in the races for the seats in the Texas House. Okay? Do you believe that the Democrats should get the 60% of the seats?
I guess not necessarily. I mean, but the premise of your question, right? The premise of your question is, which is a silent premise in many ways, is that people are voting based on party lines.
So if a party runs a slate of candidates and that party's candidates in total get 60% of the vote, do you think?
Yeah, that's my question.
Do you think that party's candidates should hold 60% of the seats?
Not necessarily. I mean, you could have some extremely popular candidates on one side that are getting a lot more of the vote than they deserve, right? Or not deserve. I mean, they deserve the votes. They got the votes. But that may not necessarily reflect the party. Right?
No, because that could never happen because of the one vote rule, right? Because each jurisdiction is each district is supposed to have about the same number of voters. No, they're supposed to have the same number of voters from district to district.
So, Tom, I agree, but think about it this way, okay? Think about in District 1, you have an extremely popular Democrat. Let's just assume, for sake of argument for a moment, which I think is necessary for your hypothetical, by the way, that there's just no gerrymandering. Let's just assume that this is just Republicans put up candidates, Democrats put up candidates, right? But it's district by district. So, District 1 could have an extremely strong Democrat, okay? Who's extremely popular. And he or she could get 70, 75% of the vote against a Republican who's just not particularly smart, or, is very offensive in some way, or whatever else. So that Republican candidate, irrespective of party, would be bringing down the number of votes that his or her party got. That doesn't mean that. So you could easily have a situation where, Democrats run 15 or 20 really popular candidates, and as a result, they run up the vote, right?
I don't think so, no. Because of the proportional size of the districts, right? Maybe you have you run up the percentage of votes, but over the larger scale, you're not going to get a significant skew one way or the other. But we can...
No, you totally could. You could have 1 million voters per district, right? Think about it this way. You could have 1 million voters per district. You could have 10 extremely popular Democratic candidates out of those, in the 35 districts. Let's say you have 35 million people, right? You have 10 really popular Democrats that win by 75+% of the vote. That's 7.5 million votes right there. The rest of the elections could be extremely close. You know what I mean? But the skew would be shifted in a material way.
Well, then let me ask the follow-up question to that line of logic is how, at what point do we say that it's not okay that a party that wins a certain percentage of the vote doesn't get a certain percentage of the seat, right?
So I actually think that Rooch is not quite wrong. I think this is something where people can differ. In a lot of countries, the way it works is that the party that gets a lot of countries use proportional representation, and so if a party gets 60% of the votes, they get 60% of the seats, and I think that's better. I think that's better for a lot of reasons, including that it solves the gerrymandering problem. But the Supreme Court in the United States has actually said that there's no right to proportional representation. So the Supreme Court has said that if your party slate of candidates get X percent of the vote, you're not entitled to X percent of the seats. The thing in Gill v. Whitford, which is the case we talked about a couple weeks ago, the thing that the plaintiff is asking for is not for proportional representation, which I think is basically Tom's question. What they're asking for is symmetrical polarization. And so if one party gets 60% of the vote and, say, 52% of the seats, then the other party, when they get 60% of the vote, should also get 52% of the seats. It shouldn't be that one party can get a majority with 40% of the vote and the other party needs 60% of the vote to get a majority.
Yeah, I think this comes down to sort of like, which is a test that I liked in the Gill that was proposed by the plaintiffs in Gill v. Whitford, which was, it needs to be particularly egregious in order for us to start having the courts review this. You know what I mean? And so I think the Virginia example it could be a decent one once we have the final vote count on the state delegate race, right? Because if you have, if in that state delegate race, you have a situation where the Democrats got, let's say, if the Democrats got 55% of the vote, okay, and they get 51 of the seats, that's not so egregious as to warrant scrutiny, right? If now, for example, they got like 60 or 62% of the vote, but they only got 50 or 51% of the seats, maybe that's something that needs to be scrutinized, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. That's the question I was getting at, is what threshold do we say, if they got 90% of the vote but only 40% of the seats, we're obviously going to say, well, something might be wrong here, right? But if, it seems like you're saying, like, if you're looking at a race where a party gets 60 or 70% of the vote but are barely eking out a majority, then maybe we should be questioning what's going on.
Yeah, and then we can go into a fact-intensive inquiry, right? So I think, like, I just don't think that if you get 60 – I mean, maybe there's no disagreement here, but I don't think that if you get 60% of the vote, across all the delegate races, that means that you deserve, 60% of the seats. Like, I mean, AJ and I are different in this respect. I don't like the proportional representation system.
Oh, I think the proportional representation system is superior for a huge number of reasons.
Yeah, I think it's inferior for a huge number of reasons. Yeah.
AJ, why do you think it's superior? Like what?
Principally, I think it's because it solves the districting problem. Proportional representation doesn't rely on districts, right? You in a national campaign, a party runs a slate of candidates. They say, here's our list of 100 people. If we win 100% of the vote, these are the 100 delegates that would sit in the House of Delegates. And if we win 60% of the vote, we'll probably get, say 55 or so members in the House of Delegates. And you just take the first 55 people on our list. And there are no districts. There's no gerrymandering. There's no redistricting. I think that districting is an intractable problem in democracy. I think that single-member districts also cause all sorts of other problems. This is Van de Vanter's law. Basically says that single-member districts and first-past-the-post elections will increase the likelihood of a two-party system. He says they make them all but inevitable. I think that it stifles the choice that voters have, and it causes voters to live in gerrymandered districts. Or even if the districts aren't gerrymandered, they're still they can still be skewed for other reasons, like just demographic shifts over a districting period, or just because of how cities are laid out by random chance, how counties are laid out, where state lines are drawn. There are all sorts of random reasons why you would find yourself in a district where it is harder for you than for your neighbor to elect the candidate of your choice. And I think that's unfair. And when we have a system that fixes that problem, why shouldn't we use it?
Would under your proportional representation, hold on, under your proportional representation system, would that allow for third parties to come in?
Yeah.
So you'd basically be governing by coalition.
Yeah, that's one of the downsides of proportional representation. You're much more likely to have to form coalition governments.
So that's not even actually my biggest reason for opposing sort of proportional representation is it solves one problem really well, which is the redistricting problem, but ignores a bunch of other problems, right? So to me, redistricting is one of many problems. And one of the other very important problems is the idea of sort of having local representatives represent your local issues, And
yeah, but Germany solves that problem and still has a proportional system.
how do they solve the problem?
So what they do is they use oh god, I forget the name for it, but it's basically like second order or rank list voting systems, but they're still
Sounds too confusing for Americans.
But they're still on a geographic basis, and so what you basically have is a type of proportional system within each of the jurisdictions in Germany, and so you have these multi-member districts with ranked choice lists. And so voters can sort of choose. They get to vote multiple times in each election because they live in these multi-member districts. So you say, here's my first choice, here's my second choice, here's my third choice, and you end up with you end up with candidates that represent a district in particular, and you have a local representative, but you still have the same effect as a straight proportional representative system. So rank list voting solves your problem and solves my problem.
Yeah, I think the problem with rankless voting is it's very complicated, and I think
not that complicated.
It doesn't. I don't know, man. Going to the polls like multiple times.
No, you go to the polls once. You just vote multiple times the one time you're at the poll.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sounds like voter fraud, dude. Let's get Trump's electoral commission in here.
Yeah, dude. That sounds like you're encouraging people to commit voter fraud.
No, in Germany, it's not fraud; it's just the law. Anyway, other things that went on in Virginia. A Democratic Socialist of America endorsed socialist candidate beat a member of the Virginia GOP House leadership. He beat one of Virginia's most powerful Republicans, which is sort of amazing if you think about it. This is like a Bernie Sanders style Democratic Socialist who has won like a fairly high profile state election. Also an out trans woman. Oh, and the name of the socialist candidate was Lee Carter, and then I'm going to make sure I get this name right. Danica Rome, I think is how you pronounce it, is the first openly out trans woman to win a state house election and be seated. There was a woman in the past who was openly trans and won an election, but then wasn't seated. I think in New Hampshire.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is pretty exciting. Like if she's actually seated in the legislature, she will be the first.
Also, her
trans
opponent
to reach that achievement. Her opponent wrote Virginia's bathroom bill. He was like a big deal
not just
bathroom
that,
guy.
But he called himself Virginia's chief homophobe.
Yeah. So I think that's like fairly telling. I think that's like great. I think that's like great news.
Yeah, it is great news.
I think that also a DSA-endorsed candidate in Philadelphia won district attorney. This is someone who had made his career actually on the defense side and had sued the government on behalf of groups affiliated with Black Lives Matter and things like that. And this is sort of not a traditional profile for someone who you would think is involved in law enforcement. I think that's going to be a real benefit to Philadelphia, to have.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of. I think you're seeing the sort of like the fruits of the Sanders presidential campaign are being born at these down ballot races, and I think that's like going to be good for the country.
The thing that I was most interested by was, in addition to this Seattle election, so Ed Gillespie, who lost the Virginia governor's race in 2014, he ran, or 2000 was it 14? Yeah, 14. He ran against Mark Warner. And Mark Warner is a U.S. Senator from Virginia. And I believe Gillespie lost that election by something like a few hundred votes. So it was extremely close, right? Statewide Virginia election, Gillespie loses by like 400-something votes. In 2016, Trump loses Virginia to Hillary Clinton by 5%. This election, Gillespie's running again. He's running for governor this time, and he loses by 9%. So to me, this says a few things. One, so Gillespie kind of shrouded himself in Trumpism, right? He ran a bunch of really racist ads in the last month of the campaign. He said that like if Ralph Northam won, like Virginia would be overrun by MS-13 and sanctuary cities, and it was a proper Donald Trump style fear mongering of a campaign, right? He was endorsed by Steve Bannon, so he also had that kind of ace up his sleeve, and he got spanked. And he got spanked by somebody who wasn't that good of a candidate, right? Ralph Northam was not like, he wasn't that good of a candidate. I mean, he was like, the thing that I've been joking about is that like, it was sort of a joke, but now maybe it's for real, which is that maybe Democrats need to run on the Make America Boring Again slogan, right? They just need to say, listen, you're not going to have to wake up anymore and worry about like what your president might do. You're not going to have to worry about what he might have tweeted. You're not going to have to worry about that he's antagonizing our allies, because America's going to be boring again. America's just going to work. We're going to elect somebody that just wants to work on issues like schools and healthcare and, fair tax policy and all of those other things. And we're just going to make America boring again. It's not going to be exciting. It's not going to be any of those things.
A regular Barack Obama, if you will.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And I think like that's what we're going to do. You're not going to have to worry about us getting into another war. It's going to be a really boring country where, you get to wake up and like worry about why your kids are crying, not about like, is it because there's a nuclear bomb headed your way, And I think that was, I mean, he didn't say the words "make America boring again," but that was kind of Northam's race, right? He talked about really bread and butter issues. He talked about how like we need to stop being so divisive and hateful. And he did it in a really, really boring way.
I don't know. I don't think that that's right. I think that Rooch is having a little bit of pundit's fallacy here, where you can look at all elections are a little Rorschach test, and if Northam had won or if Northam had lost, Rooch would still probably come out with that same conclusion that his policy preference ought to be expressed by candidates.
No, it's not a policy preference issue. I mean, listen, I think if Northam had lost, I don't think I could have come away with this conclusion, right?
No, but I think you are a small C conservative, that you sort of you have a bias towards moderation, right? Like an FDR, like a Rooseveltian small C conservative, right? And I think that like, I think that you basically were like what you basically just described is like, oh, we should have these moderate small C conservative campaigns, because, and I think the reason why you say that is because that's what you like.
That's definitely true, but this is a situation where it worked swimmingly well, right? Like that's what this guy was. I mean, he's even more than that. He voted for George W. Bush twice.
So Nate Silver said that the outcome of the election was basically what their demographic model would have predicted, absent knowing any information about the individual campaigns. So I think you can draw from this election, and from any election, whatever conclusions you want to draw from it.
I see. So that's one of the things about Nate Silver, right? I think he would have been able to fit any series of polls to these election results, right? Like, I mean,
that's not true.
To any election result, right? Because the polls certainly didn't predict this, right?
Yeah, they did.
The aggregate of polls were like this was going to be Northam. It was either going to be Northam +3, or it was going to be potentially even Gillespie, and instead it was Northam +9. That's huge.
So to put things in perspective, the miss in this year's gubernatorial election, the polling miss is about the same size as the polling miss in the 2013 gubernatorial election, where the polls were predicting McAuliffe by like 4 or 5, and then McAuliffe won by like slightly less than 1%. And so for the size of the miss is about the same. It's in the opposite direction, but Nate Silver always says that polls can miss in both directions, and that's just what a margin of error is, right? Like a margin of error is usually symmetrical. And so the polls in this election were about as good as the ones in the last gubernatorial election. And I don't know what that tells you either way. Anyway, Rooch has to get going eventually. Tom, let's do some Supreme Court cases.
Do you want to do a Supreme Court case on the Alien Tort Act or a criminal case?
Alien Tort Act.
Tort Act?
Definitely Alien Tort Act, yeah.
This case is Jesner v. Arab Bank PLC. And what's cool about this case, actually, is that Radiolab did a terrific podcast on this called Enemy of Mankind. And the issue in this case is, does the Aliens Tort Act prohibit corporate liability? Right? So the entire question is, are corporations people too, my friend? In this case, according to OIES, several alien individuals were injured, kidnapped, or killed by terrorist attacks against Israeli citizens overseas. The surviving aliens and their families of those who perished in the attacks accused Arab Bank PLC, a bank corporation headquartered in Jordan, of financing and facilitating various terrorist organizations involved in the attacks. The survivors sued Arab Bank in New York federal court under the Alien Tort Statute, which provides that a federal district court jurisdiction over civil actions brought by aliens. Now, if the Arab Bank was a person, right, like an individual that was handling all this money, or like a runner who was just, handling the money of these terrorist organizations, I don't think there's any question that the Alien Tort Statute would apply, and we wouldn't be at the Supreme Court. But the question is, because they're a corporation, does this Alien Tort Statute apply?
I mean, corporations are people, my friend.
You would think, right?
It's hard to, I don't think this isn't to say they won't argue this, but it's hard to say that corporations are people in the context of speech, but are not people in the context of, being responsible for things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll give you the Arab Bank argument, which is that this is actually, and it would be really interesting. You guys should listen to this podcast that Radiolab did, because the history of this case is really interesting. It started out as a dispute between two French citizens, and so like a French individual, but in the United States, right? So a French individual basically assaulted another French muckety muck. You know how the French are, and
so offensive, Tom.
Yeah,
so offensive.
I know. Macron can come after me.
Dude, this is a family podcast that we want French people to listen to this podcast.
But basically what it caused an entire, this was back at this is the first Congress that passed the Alien Tort Statute. And what happened was there was a big brouhaha. The French were upset that their ambassador had been insulted in this way, and they wanted recourse against this individual. It caused all sorts of international problems. So the first Congress passed this Alien Tort Statute, basically allowing aliens to sue in our courts. And that was pretty much the end of the issue for basically a very long time, until the late 80s, early 90s, when a couple of individuals used the Alien Tort Statute to sue for wrongs that were committed in, I believe, let me look this up before I get it incorrectly, Paraguay. This lady whose brother was basically tortured and killed in Paraguay, decades later found her brother's torturer and killer in living in New York City. And so she reached out to these constitutional lawyers and said, is there anything we could do? And they found the Alien Tort Statute and sued this guy, because what the Alien Tort Statute says is, look, for these weird situations where we have aliens that are suing in our courts, we're not going to really apply federal law. We're going to apply what's called the law of nations. Basically, is there something out there that so there are some basically types of conduct that everyone is going to believe is bad and should be punished, right? And so torture was seen as one example of that in this Paraguayan case. And so with that Paraguayan case in the early 90s started this sort of boom of Alien Tort Statute cases to secure human rights all across the world, right? And so it's kind of evolved into this tool that the United States has used to attack human rights problems that occur throughout the world. And now, and in all of these situations, it's basically been a question of, well, these are individuals that you're going after. Now you have a corporation that is at issue.
Nah, I don't think they're going to do it.
You don't think so?
No.
I wish they would, but I agree with AJ.
What's the vote count?
It's going to be 6-3.
Yeah, I think it's going to be even more than that. I think it's going to be like 8-1 or 7-2.
8-1 for the bank?
I think it's be 6-3 for the bank. Breyer's going to come on board.
What do you think, Tom?
I have in my notes 5-4 Jesner, which is the individual. But I can't remember why I put this in the notes. This is, I created these notes so long.
Oh, I bet it's a procedural thing.
I don't have any notes about the procedure in here. I just have, all my notes is does the Aliens Tort Statute prevent corporate liability? And see this great Radiolab episode. It's a great Radiolab episode.
Right.
Like, I wish I could use this as my sidebar as well.
Do it. Make it your sidebar. Do you want to do sidebars?
No, I've got another sidebar.
Okay. Rooch, what's your sidebar?
Dude, my sidebar was going to be these Lululemon shorts.
Dude, this is another example of you hawking your wares on
Dude,
our
what
show,
wares?
dude.
What wares, dude? They're not mine. I wish they were.
Rooch, it's actually a crime to buy stocks and then puff it. Even
No, it's not. If you disclose it, actually, it's not a crime at all. But I don't own the stock anyway, so
no, it's
doesn't
a crime.
really matter.
You're a felon now.
No, dude.
No, it's like
this is totally.
No, it's like the SEC can shut us down now.
We need to have a section on our website that just keeps track of all of the wares that Roochit hawks in which episode.
I mean, that way people can know.
The Amazon Bazaar. What else has he hawked?
Dude, I can't wait to get my my grill, my wood fired grill.
Oh yeah, the grill,
Dude, that's gonna be amazing.
The cooler.
All right, my sidebar is the Obituary of Irv Rafkin. The title of the obituary is "Brash Accidental Spy in World War II Dies at 96." This is just like a really stunning biography of a person. I don't know very much. I'd never heard of this person before I read this obituary, but this is someone who was training as a demolitions expert in Canada, and sort of accidentally got sent to Europe before he was supposed to, and he dropped in a parachute into Europe and became a spy. He would dress up as like a Wehrmacht corporal and go around doing spying stuff, which is pretty wild. And you should just read it. It's pretty short, but I really think that they should make a movie or a book or some sort of book with moving pictures inside that you can watch.
Sounds cool.
So, Richard, do you actually have a sidebar?
Yeah, it's the shorts, dude.
No, dude. Are you seriously shorts? Come on.
Yeah, these are really nice shorts, and if Lululemon would like to sponsor us, that way I could get a pair of these shorts, without paying $68. I mean, $68 for shorts. Can you believe this? I mean,
is this another Twitter thing where you've never actually worn or seen these shorts, yet you're acting as if you're an expert?
Tom, what's your sidebar?
My sidebar is this Texas Tribune article called "How Renting Furniture in Texas Can Land You in Jail." What? And no, it's crazy. It's crazy. So you guys have heard these rent-to-own centers, right? Like you go in and you buy, you want to buy like a couch, and instead of paying the $200 or whatever, or $500 for that couch, you pay $20 a month for the next 40 years, and you're renting to own it, right? Well, and if you look at this article is great because if you look at the terms of these rent to own things, they're completely one-sided. Obviously, you'd never actually have ownership of the couch until you pay off every last cent of the $6,000 you're paying in order to buy this $500 couch, right? There's a statute in Texas, however, that if you do one of these rent to own deals and you stop paying, right, the renter, the company that rents you this furniture, can go to the police and say, you've stolen my furniture and you're on the hook for theft. The police can arrest you and put you in jail. And so the Texas Tribune, in collaboration with this website called nerdwallet.com, did this great article about how renting furniture can land you in jail.
Yeah, that is all accurate.
It's like modern day debtor's prison.
Should we call it?
I guess. Rooch, don't you have to like go?
Yeah, aren't you guys going to talk about Bitcoin now? Should I drop off? Guys, I'm thinking about, for the first time in quite a while, there's a lot of things that I feel like buying. Can I tell you guys what I feel like buying? I feel like buying an Apple Watch 3.
Do it. Do it right now, dude, while we're on the call.
Yeah, I have an Apple Watch Series 3.
I feel like, I don't know if I want the cellular or not. I also feel like buying a new MacBook.
You should do both.
I feel like buying an iPhone 8, but not an iPhone X.
Dude, the touch pod, or the touchscreen MacBooks are awesome.
No, but there is no touchscreen MacBook.
Well, whatever they call it, the touch bar. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Dude.
Yeah.
Dude, anyway, I feel like buying one of those regardless, despite the fact that it's not a touch. But, I really feel like buying a watch, an iPhone 8, and then lots of clothing from Lululemon. Like, those are the big things that, and really I would be happy with just a watch and a bunch of clothing from Lululemon.
I think you should prioritize the computer, because it's my general understanding you have like half a computer every 3 weeks. I thought Steph had the Touch Bar MacBook Pro.
No, she doesn't. That's a long story. I don't need a new computer. I think I would like an Apple Watch because I want to track my heart rate when I'm working out. You know what I mean? And then I want just a bunch of Lululemon stuff, It's the most comfortable clothing in the world. And here I am with a little bit of Lululemon stuff, but...
Rooch, do you own stock in Lululemon?
I have over time. I don't currently own stock in Lululemon. I'm thinking about buying stock in Lululemon in advance of their earnings.
In episode 23, Rooch raved about how Amazon's India Bazaar was the best clothing store on the planet.
Well, it was pretty cool, all that stuff that they had, But I just think Lululemon's safe. You know what I mean? I think Lululemon's safe.
That's what Blockbuster said.
Tom, you can't just say every time, like you can't just like bring up a defunct business every time. Like you're like, this business is okay. I think Uber's okay. Tom's like, that's what Blockbuster said.